Man, I'm excited to be with you all and what we're about to do. We have our next guest who's a strong partner in NACo. He's community-minded, business-focused, and he has a human service heart. He's our 19th Secretary for the Department of Transportation. And so give it up. Yes, and we're pleased. He's been with us through our annual conference in 2021. He was at our legislative conference last year. He has discussed issues with us around transportation and understands the county's priorities around infrastructure improvements. Secretary Buttigieg understands counties because he served at the local level, y'all. He was the mayor of South Bend, Indiana. So please join me as we welcome our Transportation Secretary, Pete Buttigieg. Oh, thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Secretary.
Morning.
Good morning, Mr. Secretary. We really appreciate you coming and being a part of what we're doing. We're in the second and third year of the bipartisan infrastructure law. And this law has done great wonders for us across the country. Just talk to us about how this law can help us as we modernize and try to move towards electric cars and vehicles and moving forward. And we just appreciate what you're doing.
Well, thank you. And first of all, just thanks to everybody for your leadership. Thanks for your leadership here at NACo. When I was a mayor, I believed that local government was the key level for getting things done. And I feel that even more strongly now that I'm here in Washington. The reality is the answers, the projects, the delivery doesn't come from Washington, but more of the funding should. And that's exactly what we're doing with the bipartisan infrastructure law. We are seeking to work with our partners on the ground to help you meet the priorities that you've known all along need to get done. Now, if I think about it in terms of the timeline of this administration, we really spent our first year just making the case.
Yes.
And with your help, we got that done. It was one of the bipartisan achievements that the president was able to speak about in the State of the Union address. Just a couple of weeks ago, he was with the Republican Senate leader celebrating that Brent Spence Bridge. It has been thrilling to do that. But we spent the first year just getting that thing passed. And then the complexity and the proportions of the programs we set up meant that we spent most of the second year getting it all stood up and created, setting up the plumbing, if you will, that all of that funding was going to move through.
Yeah, right.
Now comes the fun part.
Yes.
This is when we are really seeing the dollars begin to move and even beginning to see the spades turning and the dirt flying. With your help, 3,700 bridges that we now have getting started to be improved. Over 70,000 miles of highway, 8,000 buses, ferries, and other pieces of transit equipment. And we're just getting started.
Woo.
It's an exciting time.
That's right. That's it.
And you mentioned the EV part. Look, everybody catch a Super Bowl last night? The automakers are going to do more to literally sell electric vehicles than any policymaker can or should. That's where industry is going anyway.
Right.
But what's not going to happen anyway is for it to reach enough communities quickly enough, especially when we're thinking about charging, so that everybody can take advantage of it, especially as EVs become more and more affordable. And the biggest barrier to somebody being able to save the gas money or the diesel money that you have by owning one becomes charging.
Right.
And that's where our partnership comes in. We're providing, again, more funding. But you all are going to need to put together the local information and the localized inputs on the applications about where some of these chargers actually need to go.
Right.
So that's just one example of the partnership that we are building up, but it couldn't be a more exciting time for transportation. It's had its challenges.
Right.
I mean, if you look at what the American transportation systems have faced in the last 2 or 3 years, partly because of the pandemic, we've faced issues from container shipping to airline cancellations. Mm-hmm. Now we got balloons.
That's right.
But also the best time ever to be working in transportation because of these resources. And we know ultimately it's in the hands of those who are on the ground that the biggest difference is going to be made. Thank
you, Mr. Secretary. And speaking of programs, we have what we call the Safe Streets and Roads for All. It's $1 billion counties that they're about to invest through the bipartisan infrastructure law. Tell the counties on how can we access those funds.
So of all of the priorities that we have as a department, safety is the most fundamental one.
Right.
I believe it's why the Department of Transportation exists. Mm-hmm. And we ought to be up in arms about the crisis of roadway deaths in this country. I think because...
Y'all can clap for that, come on.
I think part of the problem is because we're so used to it, it becomes easy to treat it as if it were inevitable. Think about it. Every one of us knows, probably takes more than both hands to count people we know who've been killed or seriously injured in a car crash.
Right.
It's as if we all grew up in a country going through a war.
Right, right.
And we need to remember that it is not inevitable. We have a national roadway safety strategy that focuses on several areas that can make a real difference in eliminating roadway deaths. Safer vehicles, safer speeds, safer people, safer roads, and I'm going to come back to that, and a better standard of post-crash care, all of which, either through your direct authorities in county leadership or through your credibility in the community, you can make a decisive difference in helping to improve. But again, this is one of those examples where I'm not just here urging you to do it, we are funding you to do it.
That's right.
That's part of what's in the infrastructure. What does that mean? The infrastructure law includes this Safe Streets and Roads for All program. This is going out at the clip of about $1 billion a year. We just did the first round of grants. And unlike most of our programming, a huge proportion of it is for planning. So we did about 36 communities that got funding for construction. But we had hundreds of communities get funding for planning. And by the way, by planning, we don't just mean designs on a sheet of paper. You can actually prototype some of these things. Some of you have done really interesting, clever things. Before you want to commit to pouring the concrete to redesign the curb in a way that your county engineer tells you is probably going to be safer, you do it with paint. And you see if it works the way you thought it did. Those are things that we can support through these planning grants. And they go directly to units of government smaller than the state level, precisely because we know that it is at that level that you can get so much done. Counties, MPOs, cities and towns, those kinds of entities, tribes, those kinds of entities we can work with. So I would strongly encourage you, if you haven't already, to look at this, because pretty soon we'll be releasing the next round of funding. And those planning grants, I think you can also use to create more of a culture around safety,
That's
to
right.
bring people to the table, bring communities to the table. And this last point I want to make about this is a very data-driven process. Unfortunately, we have so many examples, so many lines on those spreadsheets for 40,000 deaths a year that we have a lot of data. We have tools that we can share with you. A lot of them are publicly available, so you can literally see where the dots are on the map. But you might not need to log into our system to know that corner everybody talks about, that curve everybody talks about, that spot everybody talks about, where something's got to be done. And one of the best things we can do to save lives is just a better design on some of our roadways. So we are here to help you. We're not going to sit here and tell you, which corner, which spot, which curve it is. You already know. But come to us with a plan to bring your community together. And there's a good chance we can help you get that funded.
And I think that's very important because what NACo has been able to do to get the direct investment, $65 billion to counties, having a direct funding stream to our counties, because we're where the rubber meets the road. Mm-hmm. If we can get those fundings, we can have those safe streets and build better roads faster. So I'm just throwing that little hint in there so you can help us later on, okay? But I have one more question. Before that question, we have microphones in the aisles. After this last question, we're going to take a few from the audience. So please, you all, if you have a question, we're not going to get to everybody's question, but please get ready after this last question. Mr. Secretary, this last question is about our rural communities. I'm half rural, if you didn't know. But 70% of the counties are rural in America. Talk to our rural folks who are doing a bang-up job on the ground on what programs can they access to make sure that our rural communities in rural America is where we need to be.
This is very important to us. So whether we're talking about a nationwide program like Infra, which is grants to help with supply chain,
right,
or programs that are specifically just for rural surface transportation, which is another thing that was created in President Biden's infrastructure package, we have more funding than ever. And we know that it's not just having the funding out there, it's making it easier to work with, right?
Right.
Rural counties don't have legions of federal relations staff to pick through federal requirements and work with our agency. We get that. And so we are available upon request. We can often provide technical assistance to help work that process, not just of securing a grant, but of getting those dollars out. And we want to help you deliver. Just to give you a couple examples of things we were able to do with the Rural Surface Program. We were able to do everything from Plaquemines Parish in Louisiana, which needed help with a ferry system that needed to be upgraded, all the way up to Moorhead, Minnesota.
Wow.
Where their downtown is kind of cut up by these railroad crossings. By the way, we have a whole railroad crossing elimination program. I know how many rural counties you've got that one spot where you got to wait 20 minutes, the train stops, it blocks things. It's a safety hazard, because not just because of any point where a train could come into contact with a car is a safety hazard, but as you know, dealing with EMS, they got to go around. Suddenly it's 20 minutes more to get to somebody. Railroad crossing elimination is probably not going to be one of the most famous parts of this law, right, but it's one of my favorites, and it's one that I know can make a difference in your communities. So one more, when you go to build.gov, go to our website or talk to our folks. Take a look at that, because I know that can be a big difference.
Bill.gov. Please write that down and get it. And one thing I like about our secretary, that he's plain spoken and pragmatic, and he takes my calls. And so, but he calls you and wants to check in because he really cares about the infrastructure of America, rural, urban, or suburban, and where we need to go. And so I really appreciate that, Mr. Secretary. Now I see one question in my center, and you got to help me with the lights, NACo, because it's hard to see, but I'll go right here, and I'll go right, and if I see some on my left side, I'll get that. So straight ahead.
Thanks, sir. Secretary Buttigieg, I'm Mike Turner from Loudoun County, Virginia. We've got a whole contingent over here at the table, and we have been talking all through the morning here. There's a virtual waterfall of federal funding and federal programs now that the counties can access. I'll be honest with you, I've been a supervisor for 3 years now. I'm overwhelmed trying to figure out how to manage this. It occurs to me while I was listening this morning, when the Affordable Care Act came out, they had a program where they trained people all over the country as to how to reach out to people who are eligible for affordable care funding. Is there any thought given to a similar program, so you have this sort of army of experts of where this money is, all these different sources that can operate at the local level to kind of sort this out for us?
I love that parallel, the navigators. Yeah, we have people navigating the healthcare system. Can we help communities navigate our own grant processes? I think without it being kind of formally called that, we are standing up a capability that I think can help here. And what it really comes down to technical assistance. I know as soon as you hear the words technical assistance, it sounds like this kind of bloodless thing, or something we give you if you didn't get the grant, like a consolation prize, right? But two reasons I'm really focused on this technical assistance. One, to help with exactly what you're describing, right? There are 40-some new programs just in the transportation slice alone. I even have trouble keeping track of them. And it can be a dizzying array for a community trying to figure out what's going to make the biggest difference. So part of it is navigating that process. The second is project delivery. So getting things done, getting things permitted, shortening the amount of time between when we come to the press conference and announce the grant and when you actually have the grant agreement, you can start spending the money. That could take a year. And I know a lot of the frustration is around permitting and goes to NEPA. Love it or hate it, the law is what it is. But NEPA can go a lot quicker.
Right.
If certain things are done early on and on the front end, we can help with that too. So those are some of the things. We have a limited but real level of U.S. DOT staff who can help, and we'd be happy to follow up on that through our government affairs team. And we are also trying to recruit more people informally to play that role as a kind of force multiplier. And that's where I think, as you always know when you're trying to wire up ways to get things done, as county leaders who have as much responsibility as a mayor and like a tenth of the staff and the attention, right? You already know how to do this. Same as in the military, there's a person who's supposed to be in charge of something, then there's how you actually get it done. I would urge you to look for the people in your community who just care about this stuff. Because there are so many people who are there who maybe don't even have a .gov, address, but they care enough about the stuff that they'll sit in on the Zoom event or the webinar that we might do that's open to the public that helps walk through these things. They'll comb through that website, and then they'll come to the county, the council meeting or whatever the hearing process is and kind of speak out. And they can help, I think, a community get its priorities right. So in addition to the formal official process, and I'm going to take that back with me. I love this comparison to the navigators. Think about the unofficial means as well that a community can get more knowledgeable about these programs. So the grassroots excitement builds around whether it's safe streets for all, railroad crossing elimination, who knows what it'll be out your way. And make sure that you're taking advantage of that federal opportunity. I love the question.
Thank you, sir. Appreciate it. We'll go over here to young lady in the yellow. Hey.
It's an honor to be here with you. My name is Wendy Root Askew, Monterey County, Central Coast of California. And I really appreciate the commitment that you speak to about safety and the ability to prevent these inevitable deaths. And I was just wondering if you could speak briefly about pedestrian safety and the programs that are available to support communities in that regard. In California, in the past 2 years, we've had 2 county supervisors killed in pedestrian vehicle fatalities. And the urgency of ensuring that my child can walk safely to school, that my mom can walk safely to the grocery store, I know is shared among across this country. So just if you could speak to pedestrian safety and some of the programs available. Thank you.
This is a huge issue. If you look at the way that the safety numbers have moved in the wrong direction over the last few years, the part that's growing the most in terms of deaths and injuries is on the pedestrian side, pedestrian and bicycle. And so we know that we've got to make sure our policies recognize that. A couple things I would point to. One, which is more on our side, is when we're thinking about what makes a safe vehicle, we're starting to look at what makes a safe vehicle not just for those who are in it, but for those who are around it. And over time, I think you'll see that play a larger and larger role in how we assess what counts as a safe vehicle. But a little more relevantly to what counties can do, this is a big area where road design matters. Speed is huge, whether people are driving at safe and legal speeds. And the design of a road, just as much as the enforcement, can make a big difference on that. Reducing the number of conflict points is part of why when we're funding multimodal things, when we're saying you got to have bike pedestrian elements and a lot of these things, that's not just because we think it's pretty. It is a safety issue and an economic issue because it gives people another option to be able to affordably get to where they need to go. So we really want to work with you and would urge you, when you're looking at the Safe Streets and Roads for All grant in particular, but also just when you're doing RAISE, which is one of our flagship grant programs, when you're talking to the state, remember, for every dollar that we pick and choose which projects to fund, that many more go through the states by formula. Ask them if your community's needs are really being contemplated in the state transportation improvement plan. Because to us, this is just as much a part of policy on roads and streets as the question of efficiently moving traffic through. You can't separate them. Just last thing I'll mention, we can help with post-crash care. This is more in your hands than ours. But we have resources to help on that, and partnering with EMS and others to make sure fewer injuries turn into fatalities is another area where there is a good amount of federal support.
Thank you so much. Yes.
Hi, thank you for being here today. Gabrielle Nadler, Washington Monthly. Why was it important to provide a large share of money in the bipartisan infrastructure law to localities through competitive grants, since previous bills have given all funds and formula grants to state governments?
So a couple of things I would point to. First, we love our state partners as well. But having been a mayor, I noticed and lived that however well-intentioned folks in the state capitol were, they didn't always see things quite the way they looked on the ground. And, right? I mean,
Yes, that's true.
and so we want to make sure there's a both and there. Of course, the states are the primary connection for our federal aid highway funding, for example. But we want to make sure there is a way for policymaking and for grant making that we're hearing that local voice and empowering communities that have a very immediate on-the-ground sense of what their needs are. Largely as a kind of safety valve alongside the work that communities are doing to work through the states. That's part of it. The other thing I would say is that the discretionary funds, where we really do identify projects and communities we want to shine a light on, are a way to send a signal about what we hope, policy-wise, the states might consider doing with their formula dollars. It's their call. As long as it's legal, they can do whatever they see fit. But we hope that we can provide a proof of concept on great ideas that communities don't have to convince their states of to go do, that then the states will notice, and especially when you got decisions that are going to have a huge impact on safety, on job creation, on equity, on climate, that we prove that out. Last thing I want to mention. Sometimes the best way to prove or show that something can be done is to show that it can be done somewhere in particular. And a great example of this is Vision Zero for traffic deaths. When I say we envision zero as the only acceptable number of traffic deaths, some people kind of struggle with that because it sounds so pie in the sky, right? Except it's actually happened. It hasn't happened nationwide, but it happened in Jersey City, it happened in Hoboken, it happened in Edina, Minnesota, it happened in Evanston, Illinois, which are not the biggest cities, but they're not the smallest ones either. So instead of saying, how do we get from 40,000 to zero overnight, we say, how do we take the roster of the places that got there and make that roster longer each passing year? It just changes the conversation, and I think sometimes expands our imagination about what's possible. And that's yet another reason that I love working with local partners to get things done.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, and I thank the folks for asking those great questions, but as we get ready to end, I want you to give us some last words of wisdom and some hope as counties try to build our infrastructure from roads, bridges, and sidewalks. What do you want the people to know on how we should be moving forward?
So let me say this. I think we can't tell you what your community's priorities are.
Right.
But we can partner with you on priorities that I think we all share. Safety, absolutely. Job creation. And by the way, not just the job creation supported by having a great transit agency or a great highway or a new bridge, but just in building that stuff.
Right.
And I would urge you, especially because often this is more in your hands than mine, to really work with organized labor, to work with your contractors, to work with your community colleges on building a workforce that reflects the community.
That's right.
We have heard way too many stories from generations past of infrastructure where you got a neighborhood, often a neighborhood of color, that finally sees the project come to them, but everyone in the hard hats on that project looking like, doing the good paying jobs, don't look like they came from anywhere near the neighborhood.
Right.
You can build community wealth that will help close wealth gaps in this country if we can tear down those barriers. But that happens at the delivery level. Priorities like climate, priorities that we all share can be met with this. This is not going to be easy.
Right. Right.
None of this is easy. You've got to deal with escalating costs in the inflationary environment that we have. You've got to deal with permitting. You've got to deal with local alignment. You've got to deal with raw materials. You've got to deal with workforce constraints. But I would argue these are the kinds of problems we went into public service to solve.
Right.
We didn't used to get to work on those problems because it was all multiplied by we don't have any money. Now we have the funding. We're here to solve those problems together. It's more meaningful and more interesting to work on these problems, right? Than to just have it all multiplied by zero because there's no money. And so we're doing the funding, but I know it won't be easy. Precisely because it won't be easy. That's why this partnership we have with you is so important, and we stand ready to work with you every way that we can.
Thank you. And I tell people all the time, and you know this with Zoom, counties are now unmuted. You know, we were talking,
like it.
and telling you all this stuff. Well, now we unmuted, and you all are listening. Y'all give it up. We. And so we just appreciate a strong partner like you. Let's give it up for our 19th U.S. Secretary of Transportation, Pete Buttigieg. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Keep up the good work.
Thanks, everybody. Oh, wow. Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, sir.